The Beatles are widely regarded as one of the most influential and creative bands in music history. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr created an extraordinary catalogue of songs that became part of the soundtrack to millions of lives around the world. But there is another fascinating side to their legacy that is often overlooked. While the Beatles were busy recording albums, performing on stage and creating songs for themselves, their members were also writing material for other artists. Some of those songs went on to become major hits, yet many listeners had no idea that a Beatle was behind them. In some cases, the connection was deliberately kept out of sight. Paul McCartney, for example, even used a pseudonym for one song to find out whether it could succeed without the famous Beatle name attached to it. So, which songs were secretly or unexpectedly connected to the Beatles? Let's take a look at 10 songs you may not have realised were written by members of the Beatles. Number 1, I Wanna Be Your Man, The Rolling Stones. Back in 1963, the Rolling Stones were still at the beginning of their journey. They had yet to become the legendary rock giants we know today. As a young band heavily influenced by blues and rhythm and blues, they needed strong material that could help them make a bigger impact on the British charts. That opportunity came from two musicians who were rapidly becoming famous themselves, John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Lennon and McCartney gave I Wanna Be Your Man to the Rolling Stones. With their rougher sound and bluesy attitude, the Stones transformed the song into an energetic piece of early rock and roll. Interestingly, the Beatles later recorded their own version of the song. Their interpretation was tighter and cleaner, giving the track a noticeably different character. The song remains one of the earliest examples of the creative connection between two bands that would eventually become the defining forces of the British invasion. And who would have thought that a song handed to the Rolling Stones by two young Beatles would help strengthen the band's early rise to fame? Number 2, Come and Get It, Badfinger. By the late 1960s, the Beatles were more than just the biggest band in the world. Through their Apple Records label, they had also become influential figures in discovering and developing new artists. One of the bands to benefit from that was Badfinger. Paul McCartney recognised their potential and wrote Come and Get It for them, a brilliantly crafted pop song with a simple but instantly memorable melody. McCartney even demonstrated exactly how he wanted the song to be played and sung. Badfinger subsequently recorded their version while following his blueprint remarkably closely. The result was a major success. Come and Get It became an important early hit for Badfinger and helped introduce the band to a much wider international audience. The song also demonstrated that McCartney could create a successful pop record, not only for the Beatles, but for another artist as well. Number 3, Bad to Me, Billy J. Kramer with the Dakotas. So the birds in the sky won't be sad and lonely. During the early days of the Beatles, Lennon and McCartney were writing songs at such a remarkable pace that there simply was not enough room for all of their material to be recorded by the band. Instead of allowing these songs to remain unused, some were passed on to friends, fellow performers and other artists within the Liverpool music scene. One of the most successful examples was Bad to Me, recorded by Billy J. Kramer with the Dakotas. The song had a light, youthful and romantic quality that perfectly suited the musical tastes of British audiences in the early 1960s. The result was spectacular. Bad to Me reached number 1 on the UK singles chart and became one of Billy J. Kramer's biggest successes. Interestingly, the Beatles never released a finished studio version of the song during their career. Decades later, however, A demo featuring John Lennon gave fans a rare opportunity to hear an early version of the composition and to glimpse how Lennon and McCartney were shaping the pop music landscape beyond the Beatles themselves. Number 4, Love of the Loved, Cilla Black. Cilla Black was one of the singers closely associated with the Beatles and Brian Epstein's management circle. Before becoming a major television and recording star, Cilla was already part of Liverpool's thriving music scene. As she began establishing herself as a solo performer, songs written by Lennon and McCartney became an important part of her early repertoire. One of them was Love of the Loved. The song has an especially interesting connection to the Beatles because they themselves had performed it during their famous Decca audition. However, the Beatles' early recording was never officially released at the time, and the song was subsequently given to Cilla Black. With a polished production and Cilla's powerful voice, Love of the Loved took on a completely new character. It reached the UK Top 40 and helped Cilla move from being a Liverpool talent to becoming a recognised national pop star. For Beatles fans, the song remains a fascinating snapshot of the band's early songwriting years before they conquered the world. Number 5, Step Inside Love, Cilla Black. Let me find you a place. Several years later, Cilla Black's connection with Paul McCartney produced another memorable song. By 1968, Cilla had become a major star and was presenting her own BBC television programme, simply titled Cilla. For the programme, Paul McCartney wrote Step Inside Love, a warm and inviting song designed to suit Cilla's personality and on-screen charm. The Beatles themselves also recorded a version during sessions associated with the White Album. However, that recording remained unreleased for many years before eventually appearing on Anthology 3. Cilla's version, meanwhile, became closely associated with her television programme and was heard by audiences across Britain. So every time viewers heard the song on Cilla, there was a little piece of Paul McCartney's songwriting genius working behind the scenes. Number 6, A World Without Love, Peter and Gordon. I don't care what they say, I won't stay. This may be one of the most fascinating stories on the entire list. Paul McCartney wrote A World Without Love when he was still very young. However, he apparently felt that the song was not quite right for the Beatles. Rather than allowing it to disappear, McCartney passed the song on to Peter and Gordon. Peter Asher, the Peter in the duo, had a connection to the Beatles through his sister Jane Asher, who was closely associated with McCartney at the time. Peter and Gordon recorded the song with their distinctive vocal harmonies. The result was extraordinary. A World Without Love reached number 1 in the UK and became an international hit, eventually turning into one of Peter and Gordon's signature songs. The irony is that a song McCartney considered unsuitable for the Beatles became a huge success for another act. Sometimes a song that does not fit one artist can become the perfect song for another. Number 7, Woman, Peter and Gordon. Following the success of A World Without Love, Peter and Gordon received another composition from Paul McCartney. But this time, McCartney wanted to conduct an experiment. He wanted to find out whether a song could succeed if listeners did not know it had been written by a Beatle. So, instead of using his famous name, McCartney released Woman under the pseudonym Bernard Webb. There was no Paul McCartney name prominently attached to the song, and the experiment produced an interesting result. Woman still attracted attention and reached the top 20 of the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States. Once McCartney's involvement became known, interest in the song naturally increased. But the experiment had already demonstrated something important. Peter and Gordon could still deliver a successful record, even without the marketing power of the Lennon-McCartney name. Number 8, Goodbye, Mary Hopkin. Mary Hopkin was one of the talented artists signed to Apple Records, and her gentle, folk-influenced voice made her an ideal performer for one of Paul McCartney's more delicate compositions. That song was Goodbye. Rather than relying on heavy instrumentation or an aggressive rock arrangement, the song was built around a simple, graceful melody and an emotional atmosphere that perfectly suited Hopkins' voice. The result was another major success. Goodbye climbed the UK charts and reached number 2, with the top spot occupied by the Beatles' own Get Back. It is an amusing twist of fate. Paul McCartney had written a song for another artist, only for that song to end up competing on the charts with a Beatles single. Even without reaching number 1, Goodbye became one of Mary Hopkins' best-known recordings, and remains a fine example of McCartney's ability to create melodies that are simple, timeless, and emotionally effective. Number 9, Sour Milk Sea, Jackie Lomax. George Harrison was initially known primarily as the Beatles' lead guitarist, while Lennon and McCartney dominated much of the band's songwriting. But by the late 1960s, Harrison was increasingly demonstrating just how talented he was as a composer. One excellent example is Sour Milk Sea. Harrison wrote the song during a period when he was becoming increasingly interested in Indian philosophy and spirituality. The composition reflected some of those themes while also delivering a powerful rock sound. He gave the song to Jackie Lomax, another artist associated with Apple Records. What makes the recording even more remarkable is the musicians involved. George Harrison played guitar on the track, while Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr also participated in the recording session. In other words, Jackie Lomax's song effectively featured an almost Beatles lineup behind the scenes. Despite its impressive cast and infectious energy, Sour Milk Sea failed to become a major commercial hit. Over the years, however, the song has developed a cult following and is now regarded by many Beatles enthusiasts as one of the hidden gems of the Apple Records era. Number 10, Badge, Cream. And finally, we come to a song that perfectly demonstrates just how interconnected the world of late 1960s rock music had become. Thinking about the times you drove in. Badge was created through a collaboration between George Harrison and Eric Clapton. At the time, Cream were approaching the end of their career. Clapton was working with Harrison on a song that would eventually appear on Cream's final album, Goodbye. The result was Badge. The track combined Clapton's distinctive guitar work with Harrison's subtle melodic touch, creating a song that sounded very different from the traditional Beatles style while still carrying Harrison's unmistakable musical character. The story behind the song's title and lyrics is also intriguing, with the composition emerging from a relaxed and highly creative period between two close musical friends. Badge became one of the most memorable songs from Cream's final chapter. More importantly, the collaboration highlights just how closely connected the biggest names in late 1960s rock had become. The Beatles, Cream, Eric Clapton, Apple Records, and countless other musicians were all part of the same rapidly evolving musical world, constantly influencing and inspiring one another. Final thoughts, so there you have it. 10 songs you may never have realized were connected to the Beatles. From I Wanna Be Your Man by the Rolling Stones and A World Without Love by Peter and Gordon to George Harrison's collaboration with Eric Clapton on Badge. These songs reveal a fascinating side of the Beatles' legacy. Their influence was never limited to the records they released themselves. It could also be heard in the music they wrote for other performers. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison had an extraordinary ability to create melodies that could survive outside the Beatles' own catalogue. Put those songs in the hands of different singers and musicians, and they could take on an entirely new personality while still retaining the brilliance of the original composition. And perhaps that is one of the greatest reasons the Beatles' legacy continues to feel so enormous. They did not simply write songs for one band. They helped shape the sound of an entire generation. So, which of these 10 songs surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey into the hidden stories behind some of the greatest songs of the 1960s, don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more fascinating stories, forgotten facts, and behind-the-scenes moments from the history of popular music.